I want you to imagine something. Imagine you're watching an Olympic 300-meter race. The stadium is palpable with energy. You can see the runners in their block. You hear the announcer, on your mark, get set, bang. That was for dramatic flair. The runners take off. And as they run around the track in their respective lanes, one runner in particular falls down and hits the ground hard. However, you can see her get back up and get back in the race. You can see her determination. Would you cheer for her? Would you think that she has the resiliency of a spring and a ballpoint pen? Would you think that she has amazing potential and deserves to be in the race? Now, I want you to imagine that you're not watching a race. You're actually watching the life of someone with a criminal history. You're watching someone who's been disenfranchised by the American legal system, otherwise known as our criminal justice system. Imagine if this runner in particular, this person who has this criminal history, is in the race of life, but as that person is running their race, as a consequence of him falling down and hitting the ground hard, they had to start all over again. And when they started all over again, as they ran the race, imaginary trapdoors begin to spring open in their respective lane. Would you think that the race was fair for this person in particular? I'm here to talk to you today about the more than 3.8 million people who are currently under supervision in our communities, otherwise known as community supervision or probation and parole. I call these the big trap doors. The big trap doors. Every 5.5 minutes or so, someone is reincarcerated due to what we call technical violations. Technical violations. Technical violations are things that if you are under community supervision, the slightest misstep can actually place you back into custody. It can remand you into a prison cell and or a jail cell. Let's get some language situated quickly. Parole is for the purposes of people who are currently incarcerated and want to get out early, while probation in and of itself is a community supervision option that doesn't require the person convicted to spend time in jail or prison. And the original concept of supervision was actually to set people up for success. It was designed, in theory, to get people out of prison earlier, and it was to help people who were in the community get back on their feet. It was actually designed to be a springboard of the sort for success. But instead, it has become a trapdoor to failure, allowing people for the slightest missteps and or the slightest indiscretion to find themselves in a prison cell. I want to give you a few examples of what technical violations are. Unemployment. Changing your address without permission. Relapsing from substance abuse. Inability to pay your court costs or even a monthly bill. All of these things actually can put people right back into a trapdoor of inequality, instability, insufficiency, and quite frankly, disenfranchisement. I want to lay some statistics on you. If the entire population of people who are incarcerated and on probation or parole were a city, it would be the second largest in the United States of America, right in between New York and Los Angeles. And if you think that's something, buckle your seatbelt. If the entire population of people with criminal histories in the United States of America were a country, it would rank number 20 in the world, right before the United Kingdom, at approximately 68.5 million people. I want to tell you a story about myself. When I was 14, I was shot in my chest. It was a near fatal wound that almost took out my life. My father was arrested at the time. My father wasn't arrested because he was the one who shot me. My father was actually arrested because he was on probation at the time. When I was 5 years old, both of my parents were incarcerated, and I was raised by my maternal grandmother. And so when my father was eventually released from prison, he was under a term of supervision, which meant any incidental contact with law enforcement could send him back to jail. So, back to the above, when I was shot at the age of 14 years old, fighting for my life, my father, as any parent would, tried to rush to the hospital to get to me. On the way there, he was stopped by law enforcement, not for committing a new crime, but because he was speeding. And as a result of that incidental contact with law enforcement, my father never made it to the hospital to be by my side. He fell through that trapdoor and was sent back into custody for a technical violation. That is what the big trapdoor looks like. That is what people who are under supervision in the United States of America deal with day in and night out. It's a nightmare that makes Elm Street look like Sesame Street in comparison. You have to be over 30 to really appreciate that metaphor. But not only was my father a person who experienced a technical violation, but I myself experienced a violation as well. When I was approximately 21, 22 years old, I served 14 years in federal prison on a 16-year sentence. During the time that I was incarcerated, I did everything that I could in order to be able to transform my life. I got me a little bit of education. I had worked so diligently in order to reimagine what a pro-social life would look like for me post-incarceration. And I think that I was fairly successful. So after 14 years in federal prison, approximately a week out from Christmas, after having been home for approximately 2 or 3 months, I got into a disagreement with my supervised release officer based off of a job that I wanted to accept in New York City, a job that I, in my mind, thought that I had worked to earn prior to me even being released from federal prison. So an argument ensued. The day before Christmas, on Christmas Eve, I was remanded back into custody for insolence. Not because I committed a new offense, simply because I offended someone else. Someone who had arbitrary power to send me back into custody, and that is exactly what happened. It was a devastating blow to my family and even to myself. And so I want to give you some more statistics because my story is not necessarily unique. In the United States of America, blacks are 5 times more likely to be incarcerated than our white counterparts. Black women, are 2 times more likely to be arrested and or incarcerated than their white counterparts. If blacks and Hispanics were incarcerated at the same rate as white people, the prison population would automatically reduce by 40% in the United States of America. And lastly, black families, 64% of black families have a family member who has either been A, incarcerated, or B, arrested. 64% of black families know someone with a criminal history. Now, I want to talk to you about some odds. I ran some odds through a sophisticated algorithm that has been scientifically proven called Google. And I found out that through these odds, there are more than 46,000 collateral consequences to one felony conviction. 46,000 collateral consequences to one felony conviction. Pause for a second. Mahatma Gandhi springs to mind here when he said the true measure of any society can be found in how it treats its most vulnerable members. How it treats its most vulnerable members. In the United States of America, there is no population more vulnerable, more locked out of opportunity than those with criminal histories. So back to these odds. Did you know that you have a greater odd of bowling a perfect game? You have a greater odd of becoming an astronaut. You even have a greater odd of living to 100 years old than you do if you were under supervision and not receiving a technical violation. And so if you think that that's something, when you have a criminal history in the United States of America, here are a few things that you can't do. Number one, you can't get a job. Number two, you can't get housing. Number three, you can't get life insurance. Right here in the state of Connecticut, you can be denied life insurance if you have a felony conviction. Not going back 1 year, not going back 3 years, not going back 5 years, indefinitely. Even if the criminal conviction has nothing to do with insurance fraud in and of itself. But let's continue on. You can't get a business or occupational licensure. You can't volunteer in your community. You can't enroll in higher education. In 34 states, you can't even vote. And last but not least, just some of the examples that we're spitting against the wall, you can have your credit card revoked, as in the case that I recently experienced, even with a 720 credit score and no missed payments. Reuben J. Miller springs to mind here when he said those under community supervision are halfway home, living as carceral citizens. Every day for people who have criminal histories, every day for people who are under the threat of being remanded back into custody, it is a very real circumstance. And ordinary people are not impacted in and of themselves. Even celebrities are impacted. Meek Mill, who, when he was 19 years old, was sentenced to 3 years under supervision. That 3 years turned into an 11-year term. And while he was under supervision, he was violated for breaking up a fight that was captured in an airport. He was also violated for popping a wheelie on a motorcycle on the set of a music video. No one is exempt. Jay-Z in the New York Times wrote an op-ed and he said, the criminal justice system stalks black men like Meek Mill. And I couldn't agree more. A good friend of mine, whose name is Glenn E. Martin, he's the founder of the Close Rikers campaign. He said probation and parole are gateway drugs to prison. People need the intervention of opportunity. I want you to reimagine something, if you would. Imagine what it would be like if the $2.8 billion that we spend as taxpayers annually, if it wasn't swallowed through that big trapdoor on a broken and failed system. Imagine what it would be like if people with criminal convictions were not unemployed at a rate 27% higher than those without a criminal conviction. Think about what it would be like if our legal system actually offered real solutions. If we didn't apply criminal solutions to social problems, imagine how much better we would be as a community. Imagine how much better we would be as a society. I want to introduce to you 3 broad reforms that I think could help transform our criminal justice system and actually increase public safety. At the same time, reintegrating people back into our communities. Number one, we need to limit technical violations. Everyday life should not be a crime for people. If an action is not a crime, it shouldn't put a person back in a prison cell. Number two, we need to shorten supervision terms. What we saw happen in the situation as described with Meek Mill is not something that's exclusive. It's actually standard practice in a lot of states across our country. You can be sentenced to a term of supervision probably for about a year, for example. And through a series of violations, through a series of complications that really feel like a labyrinth, you can find yourself going from 1 year of supervision all the way to approximately 11 years of supervision, continually locked out of opportunities. And so we need to shorten supervision terms. Supervision terms should not be any longer than necessary to rehabilitate and reintegrate people back into society. Any longer is simply a waste of time, it's a waste of money, it's a waste of resources, and more importantly, it's a waste of human potential. Number three, we need to pass clean slate legislation. Connecticut, in and of itself, has taken a big leap in passing clean slate legislation. I'll try that 3 times fast before my talk is over. Connecticut, in and of itself, has really taken a big leap in passing clean slate legislation, but we need clean slate legislation in all 4 corners of our country and everywhere in between. In effect, this is what clean slate legislation is. After a period of time, records should be cleared. You paid your debt to society, the account needs to be closed. And our legislation should demonstrate to people that their history is not bigger than their destiny. Let me say that one more time for the people in the back. Your history should not be bigger than your destiny. A few weeks ago in Uvalde, Texas, unless you were on the planet Mars and you do not have a gray matter in your head, you could not be affected by what happened in that middle school. A mother who probably experienced trauma that no person in life wants to experience. Not only did she have to deal with the anxiety of her children being in harm's way, thank God her children weren't harmed, but she dealt with the anxiety of her children being involved in an active shooter situation. She also dealt with the nightmare of being violated because she spoke to the news media while under supervision, and her probation officer said that she would be violated if she continued to speak with news media. If not for the empathy of an understanding judge, she probably would be part of that number where every 5.5 minutes in our country, people under supervision are remanded back into custody. I believe in grace. I believe in mercy. I also believe in redemption. My grandmother used to say, no one is worse than the poorest decision that they've ever made in their life. No one is worse than the poorest decision that they've ever made in their life. We can reimagine what our criminal justice system would be if these trapdoors for technicalities did not exist. We can reimagine what it would be like to give people an opportunity, a real opportunity, not a second chance, because many people, truth be told, never had a first chance to begin with. We need a fair chance. We need to create an opportunity where people are going to be able to thrive, they are going to be able to grow, they are going to be able to glow, and they are going to be able to really be contributing members to our society. We can close the big trapdoor that constantly perpetuates this system of transgenerational failure, and we can create springboards of successes for people who have been locked out of opportunity. We can help them level up. Thank you so very much.